You are nothing. You hear me? Less than nothing. A number on a jumpsuit and a problem I haven't solved yet. Now get back in that cell before I make the rest of your sentence feel like a lifetime." Officer Dale Pruitt's voice bounced off the cinder block walls of Crestwood Correctional. He was a big man, wide through the shoulders, thick through the neck, and he had spent 11 years learning exactly how much space to take up in a hallway. He stepped forward. The fluorescent tube above him flickered once. His radio crackled. He paid attention to none of it, because every ounce of his focus was pinned on the man standing 3 feet away from him. The man in the orange jumpsuit did not move. He did not blink. His hands were loose at his sides. His face registered nothing. Not fear, not anger, not even the quiet resentment that Pruitt had learned to read in the set of a prisoner's jaw. There was only stillness. The kind of stillness that cost something to maintain. His name, according to the intake sheet, was Marcus Webb. Inmate number 7714, convicted on a weapons possession charge that nobody in cell block D fully believed. He had arrived 14 months ago without ceremony, taken his bunk without complaint, and spent each day in the yard, the library, and the infirmary, where he volunteered to stack supply crates and hand out ibuprofen to men whose bodies were wearing out against concrete. He had not once raised his voice. Pruitt pointed a thick finger at him. "I said get back." Marcus Webb looked at the finger. Then he looked at Dale Pruitt. Then he turned without a word and walked back toward his cell. Pruitt watched him go and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has never once considered that the quiet ones are quiet for a reason. He was about to find out. "Yo, wait, did you see the way that man just stood there?" Pruitt was up in his face, practically foaming, and Marcus Webb looked at him like he was reading a menu. Calm, still, like he already knew how this was going to end. "Stay with me, because you have absolutely no idea who just walked back into that cell." Marcus Deshawn Webb was born in Kinloch, Missouri, in a house where the heat worked from November to February if the landlord remembered to fix the boiler. His mother, Celestine, worked the overnight shift at a commercial laundry in Ferguson, pressing hotel linens while her son slept 2 blocks away in a twin bed he shared with his younger cousin. She left a glass of water on the kitchen counter every night before she left because Marcus woke up thirsty at 3 in the morning without fail, and she wanted him to find something waiting for him in the dark. He was a quiet child. His teachers wrote variations of the same note across 11 years of report cards: attentive, disciplined, reserved. What they did not write, what none of them had the framework to see, was that Marcus Webb was watching everything. He watched the way arguments escalated and de-escalated in the school hallway. He watched the geometry of physical confrontation, who stood where, who moved first, who already knew how it ended before it started. He watched people the way a chess player watches a board. He enlisted at 18, the week after graduation, on a day when the temperature hit 94 degrees and the fan in the kitchen rattled so hard it walked across the counter. Celestine pressed both palms flat against the enlistment paper before he signed it, not to stop him, just to feel the weight of it. He qualified for infantry, then for Ranger School, then for something beyond Ranger School that does not have a public name. He spent 6 years inside programs that existed in classified appendices and budget line items labeled with numbers rather than words. He operated in 4 countries. He extracted personnel from situations that had been declared irrecoverable. He learned to read terrain, bodies, silences, and the space between what a man says and what he means. He left the service at 29 under a separation agreement that sealed his record and removed his name from the searchable databases maintained by every branch of the military. Not because he had done something wrong, because what he had done was the kind of right that governments prefer to keep quiet. He came back to Kinloch. He tried to sleep in a bed that did not move. He tried to eat at a table where nobody was watching the door. He tried to be a man who lived inside ordinary time. He was 33 when a routine traffic stop produced a firearm in the glove compartment of a car he was borrowing, a car that belonged to a childhood friend who had not told him what was in it. His attorney said the case was defensible. The prosecutor had a different opinion. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Marcus Webb entered Crestwood Correctional with 18 months left on a 2-year sentence, a sealed military record that the state of Missouri had never successfully unsealed, and a mother who drove 90 minutes every third Saturday to sit across a scratched plastic table and slide a cup of vending machine coffee toward him with both hands. He was not a monster. He was a man who had learned to look like one to people who needed him to. Dale Pruitt had a theory about men like Marcus Webb, and the theory was simple. Stillness was defiance. Silence was aggression. The refusal to flinch was a challenge that had to be answered, or the whole block would read it as weakness, and weakness in a correctional officer was a contagion. He began in small ways, which is how these things always begin. He assigned Marcus the earliest breakfast shift, the one that started at 4:45, and made sure the assignment changed week to week so that no pattern could be established and no complaint could cite a clear policy violation. He misplaced commissary requests. He marked Marcus present at head counts 2 minutes before the count was complete, then wrote him up for being out of position when the official timestamp did not match. 3 write-ups in 60 days. Marcus Webb filed no counter-complaint. He showed up to every shift, every count, every mandatory programming session. He stacked the infirmary crates. He handed out the ibuprofen. He sat across from Celestine every third Saturday and told her the food had improved slightly and that his bunk was comfortable and that she should not worry. He did not tell her about the write-ups. She had pressed both palms against his enlistment paper. He was not going to give her anything else to try to hold down. Nah, hold on. 3 write-ups for being out of position when the man was present? That's not discipline. That's paperwork designed to look like discipline. Somebody was building a case. Keep watching. The incident that the other inmates would later describe to the investigator occurred on a Tuesday afternoon in the recreation yard. Marcus was at the far corner of the yard, doing pull-ups on a bar that had been bolted to the fence sometime in the previous decade. He did them slowly, with complete control, the way a man does when he is not thinking about how many he has done, but about something else entirely. 15, 16, 17, Pruitt crossed the yard with 2 other officers behind him, Garza and Mills, both newer. Both watching Pruitt the way young officers watch the man who controls their shift assignments. Pruitt carried a clipboard. He stopped underneath the pull-up bar. Webb, get down. Marcus completed his repetition, dropped to the ground, turned to face Pruitt with his hands at his sides. I'm citing you for unauthorized use of recreation equipment. Violation of Facility Code 712. There was no Facility Code 712. There was a Code 7.12 which governed the use of electrical equipment in common areas. Pull-up bars were not electrical equipment. Garza knew this. Mills almost certainly knew it. Neither of them said anything. Garza looked at the fence. Mills found something to examine on the middle distance. Marcus looked at the clipboard. He looked at Pruitt. That citation isn't accurate, he said. His voice was level and specific, the way a man speaks when he has already decided that being heard clearly is more important than being agreed with. Pruitt stepped forward. Are you questioning my authority? I'm noting that the code you cited governs electrical equipment. Pruitt wrote something on the clipboard. Insubordination. That's 2. He wrote a third thing. Threatening behavior. That's 3. Marcus had not moved since dropping from the bar. His hands had not left his sides. 3 officers in the guard tower were watching the yard on their cameras. One of them, an officer named Lenora Hutchins, had been watching for 40 seconds before Pruitt crossed the yard. Because something about the deliberateness of his approach had caught her attention, and she had reached over and switched her camera from standard recording to the high-definition mode used for incident documentation. Nobody in the yard knew that. Pruitt leaned in. His voice dropped to the register he used when he wanted to say something he didn't want the cameras to pick up, which is the kind of calculation that assumes the cameras are the only things listening. You think sitting quiet makes you dangerous, he said. It doesn't. It makes you easy to manage. Men like you got no power in here, no family with lawyers, no money, no name. You're a number I can write on a form and everything you think you are disappears. Marcus Webb looked at Dale Pruitt for a long moment. He said nothing. He picked up his towel from the ground beside him, folded it once, and walked back toward the block entrance without being told to leave. Pruitt watched him go. He bounced the clipboard against his leg once, then turned to Garza and Mills. "Log it," he said. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Disciplinary hearing, Crestwood Correctional, case number 1147 Webb. The charge sheet listed insubordination, threatening behavior, and a facility code violation that the presiding officer, Associate Warden Dolores Finch, had read 3 times without locating in the actual code manual. Finch was 61 years old and had worked in corrections for 34 years. She had a reputation for being rigorous, which meant she read documents carefully and was difficult to rush. She had also, in the 5 days since the incident report landed on her desk, made 2 phone calls that nobody had told her to make, and one that someone had actively discouraged. The hearing room was a square space with a folding table and 4 chairs. Marcus sat on one side. Pruitt sat on the other, in his dress uniform, with his citation forms in a manila folder, and Garza beside him as a witness. A staff attorney named Donahue sat at the corner, technically representing institutional neutrality, which meant he represented the facility's interest in the outcome that created the least paperwork. Finch entered and set her folder on the table. She had not brought her coffee. When Dolores Finch did not bring coffee to a meeting, it was because she intended to give the meeting her complete attention. She looked at the citation sheet. She looked at Pruitt. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Webb," she said, "do you have anything to submit in your own behalf?" Marcus reached into the pocket of his jumpsuit and removed a single folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it. He laid it on the table and pushed it across to Finch without standing. Finch picked it up. She read it. She read it again. Donahue leaned forward and she moved it slightly away from him. The paper was a letter. It was dated 5 days ago. It was written on letterhead from the Office of the Inspector General, United States Department of Defense. It was signed by a woman named Brigadier General Anita Carver, and it stated, in language that was formal and completely unambiguous, that Marcus Deshawn Webb had served honorably in a classified capacity, that the nature of his service precluded the standard background disclosure process, that an inquiry into the circumstances of his conviction had been initiated at the federal level, and that any institutional action taken against Mr. Webb that could be construed as punitive in nature would be reviewed in that context. The room was very quiet. Pruitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Finch set the letter down. She pressed 2 fingers against it, the way you press against something to confirm it is real. "Officer Pruitt," she said, "I'm going to ask you to step outside." Oh no. You hear that? "I'm going to ask you to step outside." From the Associate Warden. That is not a request. That is a door being closed. And what's behind it, a Brigadier General's letterhead, that is a different kind of door entirely. One that only goes one direction. What the hearing produced in the following hour was a procedural unwinding that moved faster than Pruitt had any framework to process. Finch made a phone call in her office. The call lasted 11 minutes. When she returned, her assistant had already pulled the full incident record on Marcus Webb, 14 months of it, and placed it beside the stack of citation forms that bore Dale Pruitt's signature on the bottom of each page. She requested the tower footage from the day of the yard incident. Lenora Hutchins delivered the drive personally, still in her guard uniform, and stood in Finch's doorway long enough to say, "It's all there, ma'am. Full incident. All 3 minutes of it." Then she left. Finch watched the footage. She watched Marcus Webb drop from the bar, fold his hands, and stand still while Dale Pruitt produced a clipboard and began writing. She watched him not move when Pruitt stepped forward. She watched his hands, open, at his sides, loose at the fingers, throughout the entire exchange. She called the yard's secondary camera feed. She found the same thing from a different angle. She summoned Donahue and handed him the citation forms. These, she said, were produced without factual basis and in a manner consistent with targeted misconduct. She did not look away from him while she said it. "I want you to understand what that means for the facility's liability posture." Donahue understood. He had understood since he read the Brigadier General's letter. By late afternoon, the disciplinary charges against Marcus Webb had been formally withdrawn. All 3 of them. The 3 prior write-ups were flagged for review. A preliminary finding of procedural misconduct was entered into Dale Pruitt's file. the first formal finding in 11 years of employment. Pruitt was asked to appear before Finch at 4 o'clock. He sat down across from her desk in the same uniform he'd worn to the hearing, and he looked smaller in the chair than he had in the yard. Finch set a document in front of him. "I need you to sign this statement acknowledging that the citations issued on Tuesday were not supported by documented evidence." She paused. "And I need you to understand that an independent review of your citation history going back 18 months has been requested." Pruitt looked at the paper. His hands, both of them, pressed flat against the arms of the chair. "He came at me," he said. His voice had changed register. He was intimidating. Finch looked at him steadily. "Officer Pruitt." The man was doing pull-ups, and then he stood still. "I have it in high definition from 2 angles." Pruitt looked at the document. He signed it. He did not look up from the table when he slid it back. Finch took it. "Mr. Webb," she said to the room, because Marcus was not there, but she said it like a statement of fact, showed more discipline in that yard than most people show in a career. The public portion arrived, as these things do, not from inside the facility but from outside it. Celestine Webb's 3rd Saturday visit happened 6 days after the hearing. She came through the entrance with her canvas tote and her printed visitor confirmation and her $2 in quarters for the coffee machine, and when she sat down across from Marcus, she looked at his face for a long moment before she said anything. "You look like something got resolved," she said. Marcus looked at her. He picked up the coffee cup she had slid toward him with both hands. He held it. "Some things," he said. She reached into her tote and took out a folded newspaper, the Kinloch Community paper, the one she'd been reading for 40 years. The one that's still printed on actual newsprint. She laid it on the table between them. The front page story was about a federal inquiry into disciplinary practices at Crestwood Correctional. The byline said the inquiry had been triggered by a complaint involving a veteran whose record had been classified. Marcus looked at the paper. He looked at his mother. Celestine pressed both palms flat on the newspaper, the way she had pressed them on the enlistment form 17 years ago, and she held them there. She did not cry. She had cried when he enlisted, and she had cried at the verdict, and she had decided somewhere between those 2 moments that she had spent enough of her life crying over things that happened to her son in rooms she was not allowed to enter. "The lady warden," Marcus said. "She did the right thing. People do," Celestine said, "when someone makes them see it clear." What followed at Crestwood Correctional over the next 4 months constituted what the State Oversight Board's report would later call a cascading accountability event. Dale Pruitt's Citation History Review produced findings on 11 additional inmates across 3 years. 8 of those inmates had received disciplinary sanctions, loss of commissary, extended sentences, solitary rotations. Based on documentation that the review board described as unsupported by contemporaneous evidence and inconsistent with facility camera records. The review board did not use the word fabricated. They did not need to. Pruitt was placed on administrative leave after the first week of the review. He was terminated in the 2nd month. A civil suit filed on behalf of 6 of the affected inmates was settled by the state for an amount that was not disclosed publicly, but that Donahue, in a conversation he had not intended to be recorded, described to a colleague as everything the facility has above its legal reserve fund. Garza and Mills both submitted written statements describing the yard incident. Both statements corroborated the camera footage. Both officers retained their positions after mandatory retraining. Neither of them requested a transfer, but Garza submitted a voluntary report to the Oversight Board about 2 additional incidents he had witnessed and not previously reported. He named dates and locations. The board opened a supplementary inquiry. Lenora Hutchins, the guard who had switched her camera to high-definition mode 40 seconds before the incident, received a commendation from Associate Warden Finch. She also received a letter from Brigadier General Anita Carver's office that she kept in a frame above the desk in her kitchen. Marcus Webb was released 14 weeks early. The release was processed on a Wednesday morning in March, gray and cold, with a wind coming up from the south that smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. He walked through the main gate in the clothes he'd come in with. Dark jeans, work boots, a gray sweatshirt that was slightly too big across the shoulders. He had a manila envelope with his personal effects and a bus ticket to Ferguson that Celestine had mailed in with his final care package. She was standing at the edge of the parking lot. She did not run toward him. She was 62 years old and her knees were not what they had been, and besides, she had been raised by a woman who believed that dignity was something you wore in public even when everything in you wanted to drop it. She stood still and watched him walk toward her. He was 10 feet away when she opened her arms. He walked into them. She pressed her face against his shoulder, both hands at his back, and he held her and looked past her at the road and the gray morning sky and the line of bare oak trees at the edge of the correctional facility's property, and he stood there long enough to breathe it all in and let it settle. "Coffee's on," she said, into his shoulder. "Yeah," he said. They walked to the car. "Man, that right there. You see that? That walk from the gate to the parking lot? That man just crossed 2 years of his life. Every silent moment, every folded towel, every write-up he didn't argue, every night he didn't call his mother crying, he carried all of that through that gate. And she was just standing there, with her arms ready." 6 months later, a non-profit organization called the Webb Foundation filed its articles of incorporation in the state of Missouri. Its stated purpose was legal support and record expungement services for veterans with classified or sealed military records who faced criminal charges arising from civilian incidents. Its funding came from 3 sources: a donation from an anonymous private foundation, a grant from a veterans advocacy organization that had followed the Crestwood case, and the settlement redistribution that Donahue had arranged quietly at Finch's suggestion as a condition of the state's internal resolution. Marcus Webb did not serve as the foundation's director. He served on its advisory board, 1 seat among 7, and attended quarterly meetings in a conference room in Clayton, Missouri, wearing a gray suit that fit him correctly across the shoulders. He brought a legal pad to the meetings and took notes in a handwriting that was small, precise, and slightly military in its uniformity. The foundation's first year of operation assisted 31 veterans in 3 states. At Crestwood Correctional, the disciplinary citation process was overhauled following the Oversight Board's final report. Every citation issued by a correctional officer now required a secondary officer's signature and a corresponding camera timestamp. The policy was named, informally, after no one, because the board had decided that naming a policy after its cause was not useful. But Lenora Hutchins knew what had prompted it, and when new officers came through training, she told them. She showed them the footage, two angles, high definition. A man at a pull-up bar dropping to the ground, standing still with his hands at his sides, saying 2 sentences in a clear and level voice, and then picking up his towel and folding it once and walking away. Study that, she told them. Not what you expect to see, what's actually there. In Kinloch, Celestine Webb moved to a house on a street with functioning heat and a porch that did not sag. She planted 4 tomato plants in a raised bed in the backyard that Marcus built for her over a long weekend in June, working from measurements he had made and remade until they were exact. He did not tell her what he had made them from, reclaimed lumber from a deconstruction project 3 blocks over, because it had not seemed necessary. She asked him once if the wood was sound. He said it would last 30 years minimum. She pressed both palms against the edge of the box, the way she always did when something mattered, and then she went inside to get the potting soil. All right, here's where I need to stop and talk to you directly. This story is fictional. Marcus Webb is not a real person. Crestwood Correctional is not a real facility. But you know as well as I do that every piece of this story is built from something real. The quiet man who absorbs the insult, the officer who uses paperwork as a weapon, the mother standing in the parking lot, the camera that was already running, the record that nobody can see until the moment someone decides to look. These things happen. They happen in correctional facilities and in schools and in workplaces and in courts, and they happen to people who don't have a brigadier general's letterhead in their pocket. Most of them just absorb it. Most of them fold the towel and walk back to the block and say nothing. So here's what I want to ask you. If Marcus hadn't had that sealed record, if there was no letter, no federal inquiry, no camera in the tower, would the outcome have been any different? And what does your answer to that question tell you about the system? If this story got under your skin, if you felt something in that parking lot scene, if Celestine pressing her palms down on that letter meant something to you, tell me in the comments. Tell me what hit you. Tell me if you've seen something like this, even a piece of it. Like this video, Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe because the next story is already waiting. We'll be here,